While all of the craft beer pioneers that I'm featuring in this series are unique, Paul Arney probably takes the award for being the most unique in how he approaches craft beer. So of course I had to pay him a visit, sample of his wares, and find out how he got started. And how he got started was to send out hundreds of letters to breweries around the country seeking a new opportunity for him and his wife. But
I got 2 responses. One was from this tiny brewery in Roslyn, Washington that was basically like, hey, that sounds great. We're never hiring anybody. Good luck. You know, I was like, okay. Well, but the other one was from Dr. Bill down at Deschutes Brewery, and he offered me a position.
Deschutes was in what he considers their most explorative phase of growth, with famous brews like the Dissident and the Abyss being produced. And those days helped pave the way for the explorative nature that his own brewery, the Ale Apothecary, spearheads today.
For me, the timing worked out good, right? I got to this point in my career and then was presented this awesome opportunity to really expand my knowledge.
Paul takes brewing back to the old school, a real artisan approach to an ancient art form.
I've always been kind of this amateur student of history, you know, been interested in history and all that. And I think that really dovetailed well with brewing, you know, and then learning that in my later years that I kind of leaned toward the artistic.
He uses what today are unorthodox brewing methods, but were far from unorthodox in the early days of American brewing, like implementing spruce into the process.
Spruce is we call it a heritage brewing ingredient for the Americas, you know, so before they brought hops over, colonialists were making spruce beers. And so it was just like, oh, you know, like we'll make this brewery up in the woods and that'll be kind of the identity.
He also uses wild yeast to create what are called wild ales. And the way he carbonates his brews is pretty sweet.
And so we naturally carbonate our beers with honey, right? As opposed to, you know, all this stuff comes from Oregon, right? So we have our little sources where we gather our things, and all in all, yeah, the whole idea was to create this representation of a brewery if, like, you know, Flanders happened in the mountains of Oregon, I suppose.
Right. And while Paul is creating new avenues for his creativity, he hasn't forgotten and in fact is quite grateful for his roots.
Over time, right, have brewers get to a glass ceiling and then they go out and kind of sprinkle down and grow their roots and have their own little trees growing, you know, so it's like I know for a fact that a lot of these brewers are grateful that Gary did do what he did when he did and created such an awesome business, because it's really given us that shade to allow us to do our thing too, you know.
While the old school reigns at Ale Apothecary, Paul also knows he has to be mindful of just how fickle the business can be.
Wild ales today, and tomorrow it's going to be hazy IPAs, and who knows what next it is. And so the future is probably our tasting room. We are doing some draft, and so we're making some what we would call table beers, you know, that are still barrel aged and still made with cess malt from Madras, and they'll probably take us 3 to 6 months to make, as opposed to say 3 years.
Finally, I had to ask, what gets him out of bed in the morning?
I really have found this transition from science mind, which I used to live in all the time, to this art creative mind, and it treats me a lot better. So yeah, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. What do I get to mess up with today, you know? Like, it's a lot easier to make cool stuff out of mistakes in art than it is in, you know, let's say bottom line.
Scott Elness, Central Oregon Daily News.